What is up, guys? Welcome back to Early Access Gamer. We've all dreamed of ruling the underworld, but today we're breaking down the 20 absolute best titles that let you build a criminal empire from the ground up. From the neon-soaked streets of GTA 6 to the brutal, unforgiving roots of Mafia, the old country, we're covering it all. You won't believe how intense the supply chain volatility gets by the time we hit our final chapter with breaking bad criminal elements. Whether you're a kingpin in the making or just a street-level hustler, this is the ultimate playbook. Let's dive in. Kicking off our list at number 20 is the undisputed heavyweight GTA 6. We are finally heading back to the neon-soaked streets of Vice City. If we are talking about building a criminal empire from the ground up, the scale of your enterprise here is going to be matched only by the sheer depth of this living, breathing world. While we are all hyped to start managing our illicit businesses, a lot of the community has a lingering concern. There is a genuine fear that Rockstar's obsession with realism might come at the expense of pure fun. Players are worried the character movement and shooting might feel heavy or clunky, similar to the sluggish controls some felt in Red Dead Redemption 2, rather than offering snappy arcade-style responsiveness. But when you look at the mechanical leaps they're making elsewhere, it is hard not to be optimistic. Take the driving, for instance. GTA 6 features a highly advanced vehicle physics system that blows previous titles out of the water. We are talking about visible tire deformation, where the rubber actually flexes under the load of a hard turn. Combine that with independent suspension, where wheels react individually to uneven terrain, and dynamic weight shifting that completely changes your handling, and the driving promises to be more grounded and realistic than ever before. We still have a bit of a wait before we can start running the Vice City supply chains, as the confirmed release date is locked in for November 19th, 2026. Moving down to number 19, we are traveling back to the brutal, unforgiving roots of organized crime. Mafia, the old country, is taking us to early 1900s Sicily, where you have to navigate the treacherous politics of the Torresi family to survive and rise through the ranks. Getting around the cobbled streets and the Sicilian countryside is a huge part of the experience here. You're going to be galloping on horseback 1 minute and driving period authentic turn-of-the-century automobiles the next. It is a completely unique blend of traversal methods that fits the historical era perfectly. Now, we do have to talk about some concerns floating around the community based on what has been shown so far. There is quite a bit of worry about the combat and stealth mechanics feeling bland or uninspired. People are pointing out a heavy reliance on repetitive knife fight sequences and clunky stealth systems. Some diehard fans are even arguing it feels like a technological regression in terms of NPC reactivity and world building when you stack it up against previous games in the Mafia series. But even with those hesitations, the chance to carve out a piece of a syndicate in such an incredibly raw historical setting has us eagerly watching the calendar. We will find out exactly how the empire building holds up when Mafia the Old Country officially launches on August 8th, 2025. Moving down to number 18, we have Empire of Sin. Released back on December 4th, 2020, this one drops us straight into 1920 Chicago to play as a Prohibition-era mob boss. The goal here is to seize control of breweries, speakeasies, and casinos, blending deep management mechanics with turn-based tactical combat to build your criminal syndicate. But what really makes this game stand out is the Black Book recruitment system. Instead of hiring generic grunts off the street, every gangster you bring into your crew has a unique personality, morale level, and loyalty score. They actually form complex, dynamic relationships with each other behind the scenes. If two of your enforcers fall in love or start holding a bitter grudge, it directly impacts their performance and dictates whether they are even willing to fight alongside specific allies when the bullets start flying. It adds a fantastic layer of unpredictability to your organization. Now, I have to be completely honest with you about the community feedback. Players have frequently criticized the combat mechanics for being repetitive. The tactical maps can feel uninspired and samey, and the enemy AI often makes confusing, suboptimal decisions that can make the turn-based fights feel more like a chore than a strategic challenge. But if you can look past the clunky firefights, the sheer depth of managing your crew's interpersonal drama while expanding your illicit businesses across the city makes it a fascinating take on running a mob empire. Moving on to number 17, we have Cartel Tycoon. Fully released out of early access back in July 2022, this is a hardcore logistics simulator set in a fictionalized 1980s Latin America. If you want to talk about dynamic supply chain volatility, this is the game. You aren't just dealing with rival bosses, your biggest enemy is often your own infrastructure. One of the absolute best mechanics, here's how you actually move your product. You can't just drive trucks full of contraband down the highway and expect the authorities to look the other way. You have to use smuggling via camouflage. This means physically hiding your illegal narcotics inside shipments of legal goods like vegetables, coffee, or spices. It forces you to build and maintain a massive legitimate export business just to act as a front, constantly balancing your legal farming with your illicit operations to keep the government off your back. Now, to be completely fair, a lot of players have pointed out a real issue with micromanagement fatigue. As your empire expands across the map, the game lacks the robust automation tools you really need for the late game. Managing the logistics of dozens of farms, warehouses, and transport routes gets tedious. If you don't manually fix bottlenecks or storage overflows, your operation generates terror, which brings the authorities crashing down on you. It can definitely make the late game experience feel more like a chore than a strategic simulation. But even with those late game hurdles, the moment-to-moment puzzle of building a functional disguised supply chain from absolute scratch is incredibly satisfying. Down at number 16, we have the ultimate cinematic power fantasy Scarface, The World Is Yours. Released back in October 2006 for the PS2, Xbox, and PC, and later hitting the Wii in June 2007, this cult classic asks a simple question: what if Tony Montana survived the mansion shootout? You literally rebuild your empire from the ashes, taking over Miami block by block, managing distribution networks, and dodging the heat of the DEA. Now, if you look back at community discussions, you will definitely hear complaints about the game's progression system. It is frequently criticized for being tedious and repetitive. To unlock new story missions, you're forced into a grind-heavy loop of distributing drugs and laundering money just to buy assets for your mansion. A lot of players felt this requirement artificially padded the game length and dragged them away from the more exciting combat missions. But when you're actually in the thick of the action, this game absolutely delivers, largely thanks to the genuinely hilarious balls meter. The game actively rewards an aggressive play style. As you gun down enemies, taunt them, or pull off skillful driving maneuvers, your balls meter fills up. Once it is maxed out, you can trigger blind rage mode. The camera snaps to a first-person perspective. You become completely invulnerable, you get infinite ammo, and you restore your health with every single kill. It is pure chaotic excess, which is exactly what you want from a game about building a cartel empire from scratch. Coming in at number 15, we are getting our hands dirty with Drug Dealer Simulator 2. Released back on June 20, 2024, this one takes the idea of supply chain management down to a microscopic level. You aren't just clicking a menu to buy bulk product and flip it. Instead, the game forces you to manage the entire life cycle of your inventory. We are talking about physically growing, harvesting, drying, and sorting your substances before finally mixing and cutting them to your own exact custom specifications. It is an incredibly hands-on approach to building a criminal empire from the ground up. Now, to be completely honest, the community has been pretty vocal about the rough edges. The game has a serious grind to it, and poorly balanced stamina mechanics make traversing the massive open world feel a lot more tedious than it should. Add in some genuinely clunky combat and enough technical issues to make the whole thing feel a bit like an early access release, and it is definitely not a flawless operation. But if you can look past the lack of polish, there's a ridiculously deep simulation waiting for you. Expanding your operations from a small-time street hustler to a regional kingpin feels earned because you're the one meticulously tweaking the product to maximize profits. It is a gritty, highly granular take on underworld economics that really rewards players who want to control every single aspect of their business. Down at number 14, we are taking a trip to Kamurocho with Yakuza 0. Originally hitting Japan in 2015 before dropping worldwide in 2017, this game is the absolute pinnacle of the series when it comes to building an underworld empire. It is not just about beating thugs with bicycles, it is about pure business. You get two incredibly deep management simulators here, Real Estate Royale and Cabaret Club Czar. Instead of just clicking a button on a boring menu screen to earn passive income, Yakuza 0 makes you work for it. You have to actively recruit staff, negotiate contracts, and physically defend your territory from rival billionaires. Your success in these side businesses directly funds your character progression, turning your massive wealth into raw physical power for the main campaign. Because it is built on older design philosophies, you will inevitably run into a few frustrating elements. The city relies heavily on invisible walls that box in your exploration, and there is absolutely no autosave feature. You have to manually save your game at phone booths scattered around the map. That gets incredibly tense when a massive roaming boss named Mr. Shakedown is patrolling the streets ready to beat you down and literally steal every single yen you just earned from your newly built real estate empire. Moving on to number 13, we have Crime Boss Rock A City. Released back in the first half of 2023, this one puts you right in the middle of a neon-soaked turf war. Your ultimate goal is to become the undisputed kingpin of the criminal underworld by assembling a crew, executing high-stakes heists, and strategically managing your resources and notoriety across the city map. The absolute standout feature here is the character switching mechanic during your jobs. When you're deep into a heist and things inevitably go sideways, You're not locked into one play style. You can instantly swap control to a different crew member on the fly. This means if you blow your cover while trying to sneak through a warehouse, you can immediately jump into the shoes of your heavy weapon specialist to shoot your way out. It is a fantastic way to pivot from stealth to loud combat without missing a beat, relying entirely on the unique stats and loadouts of the specialist you chose to bring along. Now, it is definitely worth pointing out what the community has brought up since launch. The most frequent critique is the undeniable lack of mission and map variety. Because the campaign utilizes a roguelite structure, you will quickly notice the game heavily relies on a small pool of repetitive map templates. After a few hours of play, running the same scenarios can start to feel tedious and grindy. Even with that repetition though, the thrill of dynamically swapping between your crew members while fighting to expand your turf gives you some seriously cool action movie moments. Moving on to number 12, we have Payday 3, the cooperative tactical shooter that dropped on September 21, 2023. While other games on this list have you managing a criminal empire from a top-down perspective, this one puts you right on the ground floor handling the violent acquisition of capital. The standout feature here is the revamped hostage negotiation mechanic. You aren't just tying people up and leaving them in a corner anymore. Now, you can actually trade hostages to buy extra time before the next police assault wave hits, adding a brilliant layer of strategic resource management to a chaotic firefight. You can even grab a civilian to use as a human shield, which actively forces the cops to hold their fire to avoid collateral damage. It really makes you feel like a hardened bank robber improvising when a job goes sideways. We do have to talk about the elephant in the vault, though. A major point of contention in the community is the game's challenge-based progression system. Instead of leveling up naturally by pulling off a flawless heist, your progress is strictly tied to grinding specific repetitive challenges. Players have rightly pointed out that it forces you to play in ways you might not enjoy, like using a weapon you hate or running the same map over and over just to get XP. But if you can look past that progression grind and focus on the moment-to-moment gunplay, the sheer adrenaline of perfectly executing a high-stakes robbery with your crew is undeniable. Coming in at number 11, we are throwing it back to March 21, 2006 with The Godfather. If you want to talk about building a criminal empire from scratch, rising from a low-level street enforcer to the absolute dawn of New York City is exactly what we are looking for. What really made this adaptation stand out was its blackhand combat system. Instead of mindless button mashing, the game actually let you grab enemies and use the analog sticks to perform brutal specific melee actions. You could strangle rivals, slam their heads into walls, or throw them around to send a message. Even the gunplay had a tactical edge, letting you target specific limbs. You could kneecap an enemy to disable them rather than just going for an instant kill. It made the violence of taking over the city feel up close and personal. Now, it is not flawless. If you revisit it today, you will notice the driving mechanics feel incredibly floaty and imprecise compared to modern open world games. There's also a very common community critique regarding the side activities. Shaking down shopkeepers and taking over rackets is central to building your illicit empire, but that extortion loop definitely gets monotonous in the late game due to a lack of variety in the missions. Despite the repetitive grind, systematically eliminating rival factions and maintaining the delicate balance of power within the five families remains a legendary power fantasy. Taking over the city block by block and strong-arming your way to the top actually makes you feel like you earned the title of Don. Cracking into the top 10 at number 10, we have Sleeping Dogs. Released back on August 14, 2012, this one flips the empire building script. Instead of just constructing a syndicate from the ground up, you're infiltrating the dangerous triads of Hong Kong as an undercover cop, balancing your loyalty to the law with the absolute thrill of climbing the ranks of a brutal criminal organization. The moment-to-moment gameplay here is legendary. Instead of relying purely on firepower, the game pushes you into brutal environmental combat. You're actively grabbing enemies and slamming them into fish tanks, tossing them into meat grinders, or crushing them in phone booths. It genuinely makes you feel like the star of a high-octane Hong Kong martial arts film, and the vehicle chases are unbelievable. The action hijack mechanic is a massive standout, letting you perform a cinematic leap from your current ride directly onto a moving target vehicle to hijack it mid-chase. Now, we have to be honest about the community's biggest gripe. The shooting mechanics are widely considered the weakest aspect of the experience. It is frequently described as tacked on and undercooked. Whenever the game forces you into a scripted shootout, it feels like a chore because the gunplay completely lacks the polish and fluidity of that incredible melee combat system. Still, the sheer volatility of managing a double life while securing triad territory and expanding your underworld influence makes this an absolute must-play. Down at number 9, we are taking a detour into pure chaos with Saints Row 3. Originally dropping on November 15, 2011, this is the game where the 3rd Street Saints evolve from a street gang into a massive global brand. Your mission is to take them to the top of the criminal food chain in Steelport by buying up local businesses and dominating the streets to secure your empire's cash flow. But you're not just sitting behind a desk crunching numbers. The empire building here is fueled by absolute absurdity, highlighted by the dedicated action button. This mechanic lets you pull off insane context-sensitive maneuvers on the fly. You can sprint down the sidewalk and execute a perfect Superman dive straight through a moving car windshield to hijack it, or absolutely destroy rival gang members with flashy pro wrestling melee finishers like a float over DDT. Now, it is worth mentioning that longtime fans had some valid gripes with how you actually conquer the city. Unlike previous entries where taking over territory was deeply tied to major story missions and felt like an escalating gang war, Saints Row 3 turned the takeover process into a checklist of repetitive side activities. A lot of players felt this stripped away the narrative weight of claiming Steelport. Even with that shift, the sheer spectacle of running your own heavily armed syndicate keeps the momentum going. It might be less about gritty supply chains and more about chaotic fun, but building your monopoly has rarely been this explosive. Coming in at number 8, we are heading straight into the Colombian drug trade with Narcos, Rise of the Cartels. Released back in November 2019 for PC, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One, this game puts you right in the middle of a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. You have to manage your production lines, expand your territory, and keep your supply chain moving while outsmarting law enforcement. Now, I have to be honest about a major community critique with this one. Unlike most tactical strategy games where you move your entire squad during a round, Narcos restricts you to moving and attacking with only 1 unit per turn. Players have frequently called this out, noting it makes the gameplay feel slow, tedious, and less strategically deep than other games in the genre. But where it loses some tactical speed, it makes up for it with a really cool feature called the counteraction mechanic. When an enemy steps into your line of sight or during specific critical moments, the game suddenly shifts from a top-down tactical view directly into a third-person shooter perspective. You actually get to manually aim and fire at the enemy in real time. It adds a sudden jolt of adrenaline to the territory management and keeps you actively engaged in the gritty firefights holding your drug empire together. Down at number 7, we are taking a trip back to the neon-drenched 80s with Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories. Originally dropping on the PSP on October 31, 2006, and later hitting the PS2 in March 2007, this prequel did not just recycle the classic map, it actually introduced one of the most hands-on criminal management systems in the entire franchise. The standout mechanic here is the empire building system. Instead of just doing jobs for other mobsters, you actively take over rival businesses. We are talking about running protection rackets, managing drug smuggling routes, and operating prostitution rings to generate a steady stream of passive income. It really makes you feel like you're dominating the illicit markets from the ground up. Plus, there's an incredibly clutch quality of life feature. If you get busted, you can actually bribe the police at the station to immediately recover your confiscated weapons. It saves you the massive headache of having to track down and rebuy your entire arsenal. Now, the system is not flawless. Players have rightfully pointed out that the empire building can get pretty grindy. Constantly having to drop what you're doing to defend your turf from rival gangs can seriously break the pacing of the main story missions. Add in a combat targeting system that feels notoriously clunky when dealing with groups of enemies, and the moment-to-moment gameplay can definitely frustrate. But even with those older mechanics showing their age, Vice City Stories laid down an ambitious blueprint for dynamic turf wars that still holds a special place in the history of the genre. Down at number 6, we have Red Dead Redemption 2. Originally dropping on consoles on October 26, 2018, and hitting PC on November 5th, 2019. This one forces you to experience the decline of the outlaw era in the American West. You're not just a gun for hire, you're actively managing your gang's resources, keeping morale high, and fighting for pure survival. Now we have to acknowledge a very common community critique regarding the gameplay mechanics. The pacing here is incredibly sluggish and deliberate. Because of the heavy commitment to realism, you're forced to sit through slow, unskippable animations for almost every survival task. Whether you're looting bodies, skinning animals, eating, or just brushing your horse, it can sometimes feel like tedious busywork that interrupts the flow of the experience rather than adding to the immersion. But that exact same obsession with detail is what makes the game a masterpiece. The environmental interaction is off the charts, especially when you look at the mud physics. If Arthur falls into the mud, he actually leaves a realistic body-shaped imprint in the ground. As he moves, rolls around, or pushes himself up, the mud realistically displaces and physically clings to his clothes and limbs. It is an extreme level of detail that makes every shootout in the rain feel incredibly gritty and real. Cracking the top 5, we have the Boss Gangster. This one takes the criminal empire formula and splits it right down the middle, challenging you to balance high-end VIP nightclub management with brutal street-level power. The absolute coolest part of this game is the dual gameplay system. The developers built a world where you can switch seamlessly between running the day-to-day business of your club and heading out into the open city to execute gangster missions, and they do it with exactly 0 loading screens. It creates this incredibly fluid transition between a tight business simulation and street-level action. You're literally moving from managing dynamic supply chain volatility in your back office to enforcing your will out on the pavement. Now, we do have to talk about the reality of the game's current state. It launched into early access on October 31, 2025, and there are definitely some growing pains. The community's biggest gripe right now is performance optimization. You're going to notice some serious frame rate drops and stuttering, especially when you're driving or quickly navigating the open world city. On top of that, early adopters have been quick to point out that the current build only holds about 20 to 30% of the developer's planned final content. It is very much an early work in progress, but the foundation of managing a volatile criminal supply line while keeping the party going upstairs is a wildly ambitious hook. Down to number 4, we have a game that redefines the idea of starting from absolute rock bottom. Kenshi, which fully released in December 2018, is a massive post-apocalyptic sandbox where the world actively wants you dead, and building a criminal syndicate is just one way to survive. I will be totally honest with you, getting started here is a nightmare. A major community concern is the incredibly obtuse learning curve. There's 0 handholding and almost no direction, leaving you to figure out the punishing mechanics of base logistics and trade entirely through a brutal trial by fire. But if you can push past that initial frustration, the freedom is unmatched. You can establish illegal trade routes, smuggle contraband, and navigate the volatile wasteland supply chain to build your own faction from the dirt up. What really sets your criminal empire apart, though, is how you manage your crew, specifically through the brutal limb loss and prosthetic system. In Kenshi, health is not just a standard bar. If your character takes enough damage to a specific arm or leg, it can get completely severed in combat. It is a harsh penalty, but it actually opens up a wild new progression route for your syndicate. You have to source and equip robotic prosthetics to replace the missing limbs, and these mechanical upgrades can actually provide massive stab bonuses to strength and speed that your organic body parts simply cannot match, fundamentally changing how you build out your top enforcers. Coming in at number 3 is Weedcraft Inc., a management sim from April 2019 that takes our theme of dynamic supply chain volatility and applies it to the literal dirt. In this one, you are navigating the complex, highly volatile, legal and illegal markets of the cannabis industry, but you're not just planting seeds and waiting for a progress bar to fill up. The cultivation system here is surprisingly deep and requires serious attention to detail. You have to actively manage every single aspect of your grow room environment. We are talking about manually adjusting the soil composition, dialing in the perfect humidity, balancing the temperature, and tweaking the lighting to maximize your yield. Beyond just growing the product, you have to crossbreed different strains to create unique, high-value varieties that cater to specific, shifting market demands, all while building political influence to keep your empire safe from the law. Now, it is fair to mention a common community critique with this one. Players often point out that the social and NPC interaction systems lack meaningful depth, and eventually the core loop can start to feel a bit repetitive and clicker-like as your operation scales up. But even with that late-game grind, the initial management phase is incredibly engaging. Balancing production quality and strain development makes you feel like a true underground botanist turned kingpin. Down to the number 2 spot on our list, we have Schedule 1, an upcoming gritty simulation that takes you from a street-level pusher to a full-blown kingpin. Hitting early access on March 24, 2025, this game leans hard into the dynamic supply chain volatility we have been talking about. Instead of just clicking a menu button to manufacture your product, Schedule 1 uses a highly tactile, minigame-based crafting system. You are literally in the lab manually mixing ingredients and managing the intricate production processes. Nailing these steps lets you create unique product variants to flood your distribution networks and dominate local turf wars in a dangerous urban environment. It is an incredibly hands-on approach to building your empire from scratch. Now, considering its early access status, early testers have pointed out a few bumps in the road. You can expect an unfinished endgame, some sporadic performance dips, and an interface that occasionally suffers from UI clutter and an overwhelming volume of information. But honestly, trying to manage a massive illegal supply chain is naturally chaotic. Once you look past the early development jank, the sheer depth of its production mechanics makes this one of the most promising empire builders on the horizon. And finally, taking the number 1 spot on our list, we have Breaking Bad Criminal Elements, released back on June 6, 2019 for iOS and Android. This game tasks you with mastering the chaotic art of dynamic supply chain volatility You have to constantly adapt your production methods, manage highly volatile chemical resources, and optimize your distribution network to keep the product moving while staying one step ahead of the DEA. The standout feature here is this specialist system. You aren't building this empire alone. You get to recruit iconic characters straight from the show, including Saul Goodman, Gus Fring, and Mike Ehrmantraut. Each of these heavy hitters comes with unique abilities you can level up to drastically boost your lab's production efficiency, fortify your base, or lead your enforcers during territorial expansion battles. Now, I have to be honest about the community's response. A frequent criticism was that the game felt a bit like a reskinned version of generic mobile base building strategy games. It leaned heavily into slow-paced wait-to-build mechanics and lacked manual control during combat, which frustrated players who felt the gameplay loop relied way too much on timers and automation rather than active strategy. But if you can look past the typical mobile pacing, the sheer thrill of micromanaging a volatile chemical empire alongside TV's greatest criminals makes it an undeniably addictive way to build a syndicate from the RV up. And that's our list for 20 masterpieces that let you build a criminal empire from scratch.
Ooh, what a run through the underworld.
Now, the real question is, what did we miss? Let us know in the comments below what your top picks are. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and smash that. Like, if you enjoyed building these digital empires with us, here's some more videos of ours you can watch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.